U.S. and Iranian delegations have ended their talks in Pakistan after a grueling weekend of negotiations without coming to a peace agreement. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance was on site in Pakistan for those talks.
We have been at it now for 21 hours, and we've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement.
U.S. officials have said the major sticking point was Iran's refusal to abandon its nuclear program, while Iran has blamed the breakdown in talks on U.S. overreach and ambitions. The talks were held just days after that fragile two-week ceasefire was announced. The future of that ceasefire is now unclear. For more on all this, I'm joined by Jamil Jaffer. He's a national security expert who served as associate counsel to President George W. Bush. Nice to meet you. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
I'm going to start, I guess, let's start with the breakdown in talks. It was apparently 21 hours. I mean, that seems, it was substantive. What is your reaction to the fact that they couldn't get there?
Well, look, I think it's not surprising in a lot of ways. We knew that the U.S. and Iran were far apart, not just on the major talks, the talks going forward, but on the ceasefire itself and what the terms of the ceasefire meant. Now, that appears to have held, and we've seen U.S. warships transit the Strait of Hormuz. The problem, of course, is that on one side, Iran says they want to be able to enrich uranium domestically. On the other side, the Trump administration has been very clear that they're not going to allow that, much less anything else beyond that, much less allow them to retain their stockpile of 60% enriched uranium. So we know that the sides are far apart on those issues, as well as many others, support of Hezbollah and the like.
Let me ask you about then what President Trump said this morning after the talks failed. He said that the United States will enforce a naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. And how does that complicate things here?
Well, I think that's, I'm not sure he's using the right terms there. A naval blockade, obviously, of the Strait of Hormuz would not benefit the United States and our allies because 20% of the world's oil transits the Strait. I think what the president is saying is, we're going to take control of the Strait back. We'll have the ships through that we want through, and we'll prevent other ships from getting through. So I think what we're trying to do is put pressure on the Iranians and say, look, we're going to take control. We're going to be in charge of the Strait, not you. And if you challenge us, we're going to get into a fight. And that's a fight, by the way, the United States would win. It would come at some cost, but it's a fight definitely the United States would win.
Tell me what you make of the way Iran has, I would argue, successfully used the Strait as leverage, and why the United States didn't seem to, well, maybe they did, why they didn't really understand that they had that piece of leverage and were going to use it.
Well, Rosemary, that's an interesting question. I think it's obvious to anyone watching this, and I'm sure the president was briefed on it early on, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs has said so as much, that the Straits of Hormuz is the essential key that Iran would use in a conflict like this. It's the only thing that, frankly, that's surprising is that it took them that long, 2 weeks, to really get to a full closure of the Strait. That being said, we've seen that, by the way, back in the 80s. That being said, the U.S. has the ability to reopen the Strait. We've done it before in the 80s with the tanker wars, but we have to decide that we're going to use U.S. warships to escort other ships through the Strait and be willing to take the fight that the Iranians might engender. And up to now, we haven't been willing to do that. Now, it appears President Trump is saying he's now willing to do that. So we'll see what happens going forward over the next week or two. But it's clear now the U.S. intends to reopen the Strait. We're not going to rely on our European allies to do that. And that means now the pressure's back on Iran. Iran thought they had a trump card in some sense, and it turns out they don't.
Do you think that will force them back to the table to continue talks? It sounds like the negotiators, the American negotiators, have left.
Yeah, look, in order for the talks to continue at this point, unless the Iranians come back to the table, what's going to happen is the war will essentially have to restart. The U.S. will reopen the Straits, and then the conflict begins again, and then the Iranians feel the pressure on. The reopening of the Strait won't be enough to pressurize them. What it will take is probably more bombing in Iran. That's not something the president is interested in doing. That being said, if he wants to reestablish leverage, that's likely where we're headed.
The U.S. president has said that Lebanon is not part of the ceasefire. Israel continues to bomb the region, and Hezbollah also returns rockets. Iran wants reparations, wants to be able to continue enriching uranium. How do you get to any kind of compromise given those things?
Yeah, Rosemary, that's a great question. I think the question probably everybody around the globe is asking themselves, because the U.S. and Iran appear to have points of negotiation that can't be reconciled. Now, that being said, there's always a middle ground somewhere to be found. The question is either side willing to give in at all? The U.S., the president has been very clear. There can be no domestic uranium enrichment. There can be no nuclear weapon for Iran, no nuclear capabilities. He has indicated he's willing to provide enriched uranium at a low level in order for Iran to have a civilian nuclear program. So that's a point of potential negotiation. The other big piece for the U.S. and that Iran will have a hard time giving up is its support of terrorist proxy groups like Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Hamas. If they're not willing to give that up, it's hard to see a deal that President Trump could get to.
Do you, at this stage, how would you evaluate what the U.S. administration has done? I don't want to say win or lose, but at this point, do you think that they have they're heading towards accomplishing what they wanted, or how would you characterize it?
Well, there's no doubt that the United States government has achieved significant tactical successes in the military side of things. They've essentially destroyed the U.S. Navy. We've also successfully taken out a significant portion of Iran's ability to launch ballistic missiles and drones. Where we haven't succeeded is taking out their nuclear program. They still have that 60% enriched uranium, about 440 kilograms of that. We've got to get that out of Iran. And then on top of that, they still have a lot of ballistic missiles and drones as well. They simply don't have the ability to launch them. So that's going to be a going forward challenge. And Iran continues to support terrorist groups like Hezbollah and tries to make Lebanon, where Hezbollah is a key player, part of the deal. That just demonstrates that they are part of their axis. They're part of their operation. Until the U.S. can break their willingness to operate with Hezbollah, we're going to have a challenge with them.
What is the thing that's worrying you most about what might unfold next? Obviously, the ceasefire, whether it lasts, but what else?
Well, I think at the end of the day, what Iran has demonstrated is that it can use the Strait of Hormuz to pressure the United States to the negotiating table. President Trump now, for his part, is going to have to demonstrate to Iran that that's not going to work for them going forward. If he's going to do that, it's going to take some significant effort. It may take a future fight in the Strait over shipping as Iran tries to attack shipping and or mine that area, which is a very tight, narrow waterway. And then finally, it may take a resumption of hostilities and the attacks on Iranian infrastructure. The problem, of course, is the last time the president talked about that, he talked about taking civilian infrastructure. That's not something the United States should do or should want to do. Yeah. And it's not something that our allies will accept either. And so that middle ground in terms of leadership targets and military targets is going to be the space to operate in.
Let me just end on Israel and Lebanon, because they've also agreed to meet next week to engage in talks. I don't know whether this breakdown is going to affect those talks. What would be needed here to stop the bombardment of Lebanon? Would it be for Lebanon to try and go in and decapitate Hezbollah? Is that even possible?
Look, the Lebanese armed forces are going to have a very hard time doing that. That's not going to be a successful effort. At the end of the day, what needs to happen is that Lebanon needs to reassert control of its territory, prevent Hezbollah from attacking Israel from its territory, and or Iran has to back off and push Hezbollah back. That may just require more attrition on the part of Israel against Hezbollah, take out more of its leadership, more of its fighters. That may just take some time. But ultimately, Israel will not stop attacking Lebanon until Hezbollah stops attacking Israel from Lebanese territory.
Jamil Jaffer, very nice to meet you. Appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks for having me, Rosemary.
Thank you. All right. As we were talking about in Lebanon, those negotiations have come to a halt between the U.S., Iran, Israel, and Hezbollah. They all continue to trade strikes. Ahmad Araji is a Lebanese Canadian currently in Lebanon, and he's also the president of the Lebanese Club of Ottawa. And he joins me from the Bekaa Valley, where he is staying with family. Nice to meet you this morning.
Good morning.
Tell me, what is it like there right now? What is the situation on the ground like for you?
You know, the past couple of days have been very intense, to the point that I had to leave Beirut, the capital where I stay, to come to the valley to stay with family. The 160 strikes that happened earlier on Wednesday were out of this world. It took everyone by shock. There were a lot of casualties. It was very sad. It was very sad and intense at the same time.
Have you thought about leaving? What is your plan in terms of whether you stay or come back home?
Originally, to be fully honest, I was just going with the flow. I wasn't intending on leaving the country. But after Wednesday, I felt unsafe, like extremely unsafe for the first time, although there was a bombing that happened next to my hotel 2 weeks prior. But Wednesday was another level of insecurity. Even 2 days post that, there were protests happening in the city. People who did not want to have the government have peace talks with Israel in Washington, which does not make any sense to me. These, just to point out, these are minorities. That's not what the majority of the Lebanese people want. So it's not just the danger of Israel striking anywhere. It's also the danger of having people, Hezbollah supporters, on the ground trying anything in their hands to prevent these talks. And for someone like me, who is against Hezbollah in every way and form, someone who does not agree with their ideology, with what they believe in, I don't see a reason that prevents our government, our prime minister and president, from having major, serious peace talks with Israel. That's our only way out of this chaos. I'm not saying that what Israel's doing is right. There's so many casualties happening, but we want peace. And for the first time in history, it actually might happen.
It does sound, though, as though to get to that point, that Hezbollah has to be removed in some way. As you said, you're not in favor of them. What kinds of things are people saying about the likelihood of that happening, and who has to be involved, whether it be the Lebanese government, whether it be Iran? What are people talking about when it comes to that?
I'd just find it extremely unreasonable to have Iran negotiate on our behalf. Just deal with your own country, deal with your own political issues, deal with your own problems, and let us be. Don't use us as leverage. Don't use Hezbollah as leverage. The only people who have the right to speak on our behalf are our prime minister and president. Our prime minister was supposed to go to Washington on Tuesday. However, he canceled his trip because there was a lot of internal problems happening. He got some intel on things that might happen in the country while he is there. So he decided to stay in Lebanon and deal with all the issues happening. But for me, to remove Hezbollah, that's also an internal matter that we need to deal with as fast as possible, because it doesn't make sense to have an entity inside a government making all its choices and all its decisions.
So Ahmad, Ahmad, not to interrupt you, but so are you going to come back to Canada then if you're feeling this level of insecurity? What's your plan?
So I had 2 flights that were canceled. That's the reason why I came to the Valley.
Right.
Here it's pretty safe. We barely hear anything where I'm at right now. So right now I'm just going to settle in, see how the country moves forward. And based on that, I'm going to decide if I'm going to stay or leave.
Okay. Ahmad Araji, well, I can tell you that winter's over in Ottawa, so if you come back, you'll at least have that.
That's good.
Okay. Take care of yourself. Nice to meet you. Appreciate it. Ahmad Araji there
Bye-bye.
in Lebanon. Bye-bye. This past week, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte met with U.S. President Donald Trump after the president voiced his repeated frustrations about the alliance and its lack of support for the war in Iran.
Let me be absolutely clear. He is clearly disappointed with many NATO allies, and I can see his point. But at the same time, I was also able to point to the fact that the large majority of European nations has been helpful.
According to officials, the meeting was a tense one, with the U.S. president threatening retribution against NATO members. Rutte reached out to NATO allies following the meeting and told them about some of Trump's demands, namely for NATO to play some sort of role in opening the Strait of Hormuz. So what do these tensions mean for NATO? I'm joined now by former U.S. ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker. Nice to see you, Ambassador.
Nice to see you, Rosemary. Thank you.
Appreciate you coming back. So I guess the Secretary General understood, he said, some of the president's frustrations with the alliance for not being helpful with the war in Iran. First of all, what do you make of the Secretary General saying that and the way he's handling the president?
Right. Well, first thing is that Secretary General Rutte is doing a great job because his job is to keep the U.S. and Europe and Canada all together and more unified as an alliance. And NATO's job is collective defense, and it's a treaty obligation for everybody. He has to keep everybody together. So doing what he's doing, working with President Trump, is vitally important. Now, when he says that he understands some of the frustration, what I think he's referring to is states that denied the use of ports or airspace or airfields for the U.S. in wanting to project force, not that countries did not join the United States in fighting against Iran. He also said in that press conference that he was able to tell President Trump allies were surprised. They didn't have a heads up about this operation. There was no common operation that they were being able to slot into. And so it's not really fair in a way to criticize them for not joining. And what we should do is focus forward, and opening the Strait of Hormuz is something allies would support. Now, I'm smiling today because President Trump just tweeted that he's going to blockade the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes.
We're going to have the British and maybe the French or others in there trying to open it while Trump is trying to block it. So
yeah, I mean, and that sort of illustrates how complicated it is to deal with President Trump. Put aside this move this morning, and we'll see whether he follows through with it. Should NATO allies be engaging in trying to open the Strait of Hormuz and be participating in that part of things?
Yeah. I think what I would suggest is the right role for NATO here. Get a good handle on what the outcome of this war is going to be as Trump sees it. So is it regime change, or is it negotiating with the current regime? And is it opening the strait, or is it blockading it and destroying the regime? We don't have a clear picture of that right now. So that's the first thing, is consultations. Once we see what the lay of the land is going to be, then we can talk about, is there a military operation that would be successful, viable, useful to provide stability, security for shipping, for transit in and out of the Strait of Hormuz? If there is, then I would say yes. I think NATO allies, not as NATO, but as NATO allies, maybe with some coordination, they would be able to participate in a naval operation like that. But we're a long way from where we are today to seeing that happen because we don't know where we're going.
When Donald Trump talks about retribution against NATO allies because he sees this as a failure on behalf of his allies or NATO's allies, what is he talking about there? Is it pulling up stakes in some of NATO countries? Is it reducing a military footprint, American military footprint? What do you make of those comments?
Well, I think what he's mainly doing is voicing frustration. And I think in some cases, such as Spain, where he already has a dislike for the socialist government there, they're going to have bad relationship, maybe tariffs, maybe he'll look at withdrawing some kind of U.S. military forces from Spain because he thinks that might be a punishment for Spain. It's actually a punishment for the U.S. military. But he's frustrated, and he wants to vent that frustration. And he also, I think, when you take a step back and you just look what's going on with Iran, President Trump is searching for the leverage that he wants in order to get Iran to capitulate, to agree never to have a nuclear weapon and let the U.S. collect all the enriched uranium, open the Strait of Hormuz, no fees, free passage, all of that. And Iran is not giving that to him because Iran has found that it has more leverage based on oil prices, gasoline prices, the Strait of Hormuz, than Trump has. And that's why I think we see Trump continuing to grasp at things like a naval blockade this morning, because he's looking for that leverage against the Iranians. That is very frustrating to him. And so part of that is also casting blame on allies.
You know, we've talked about the threats he's made in the past about leaving NATO before. He certainly did that in his first term, and he did it again in the second. But he also, the Canadian government does credit him in some ways for getting everyone to meet their targets, yes. Including the Canadian government. But are you worried about the overall impact on the alliance, just given this kind of rhetoric that he continues to have around NATO?
Well, actually, no. I'm always an optimist about NATO because I look at the shared values that the countries have. You know, Trump is a unique or an aberration in American politics, but the shared values of the countries, the shared interests of the countries, the clarity of the NATO treaty about collective defense, which still makes a lot of sense. I'm really not worried about that. And as you said, what Trump has done is prompted other NATO allies to do more, which was needed for a long time, and now we are seeing it. And I think we will continue to see allies do more, and I think that'll be a good thing. And, you know, a few years from now, we'll have another U.S. president who will have another take on things. And I think that NATO is going to come out of this okay.
Okay. Ambassador Volker, it's always nice to see you, and glad you made the time for us today. Thank you so much.
Pleasure to see you. Thank you.
Okay. Have a good day.